When we think of court jesters today, we often imagine happy entertainers in colourful outfits, making kings laugh with clever jokes and acrobatics. The imagery is cheerful, even whimsical. Pointed shoes with little bells, a sceptre topped with a tiny carved face, and perhaps a hat with donkey ears. But the reality of a jester's life in medieval times was far more complicated, and frankly, often quite miserable. Take Thomas Dury, a court jester in the Scottish court of King James IV in the early 1500s. Thomas wasn't born into comedy or performance. Like many jesters, he came to the profession because of physical differences. In his case, a pronounced limp and unusually short stature. These traits made him an object of curiosity and sadly ridicule, in an age when physical differences were often seen as marks of divine disfavour or sources of entertainment. Hello, before you settle in, I'd truly appreciate it if you take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with what I'm sharing here. It means so much to me. Also, please share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm always touched to see how we're all coming together from across the globe. Now let's create a calm space. Lower the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for a gentle hum, and let's begin this journey together. Thomas lived in the royal palace, which sounds grand until you realise his quarters were often little more than a closet-sized room near the kitchen, or worse, a corner of the stables. The king provided his food and clothing, but this arrangement meant Thomas had absolutely no independence. His very survival depended on remaining in favour with the monarch, and maintaining that favour was treacherous work. Thomas had to be constantly funny and entertaining, reading the mercurial moods of the king with perfect accuracy. One poorly timed joke about a sensitive political matter could result in punishment or even execution. Just imagine trying to make someone laugh when you know your life depends on it. The pressure would be unbearable. Yet despite these challenges, Thomas did find moments of genuine connection. He became known for his ability to mimic court officials with uncanny accuracy, bringing rare smiles to the king's face during difficult political times. And unlike many at court who flattered without sincerity, jesters like Thomas had a unique license to tell truth through humour, if they were clever enough to disguise criticism as comedy. The jester's wardrobe itself was a symbol of their paradoxical position. The bright colours and bells were meant to draw attention, but they also marked the wearer as separate, not truly part of the court's social fabric. The motley, patchwork pattern of their clothing represented their existence on the margins of society. Even their traditional sceptre, called a marotte, featured a tiny carved replica of the jester's own face, a symbolic reminder that they were always performing, always watching themselves perform. Sleep comes easier when we realise how fortunate we are not to live in such precarious circumstances. As you rest tonight, imagine the relief Thomas might have felt in rare quiet moments, when the performance could end, if only briefly, and he could simply breathe without the weight of entertaining a king on his shoulders. Let's turn our attention to another group of people whose lives were defined by routine and restriction: medieval monks. The peaceful image we have of monasteries with their beautiful gardens and quiet contemplation hides a reality of extraordinary discipline and often harsh living conditions. Brother Matthew joined the Benedictine monastery at Glastonbury as a novice when he was just 12 years old. His family couldn't afford to feed all their children, and sending a son to the monastery seemed like an opportunity for education and security. What young Matthew didn't realise was that he was trading one kind of hardship for another. His day began around 2 o'clock in the morning with a night office called matins. Imagine being woken in the pitch darkness of a cold stone dormitory, trudging through unheated corridors to the church, where you would stand and chant prayers for hours, often in temperatures so cold you could see your breath in the air. After a brief return to bed, the day officially started with prime at dawn, followed by hours of prayer, work, and study, each marked by the ringing of bells that structured every moment of monastic life. The physical discomfort was constant. Matthew's woolen habit was itchy and rarely washed. During winter, chilblains covered his fingers and toes. Painful, itchy swellings caused by poor circulation in the cold. Monks were expected to maintain silence most of the day, communicating only when necessary and often using hand signals instead of speech. This silence, while spiritually meaningful, also led to profound loneliness. Food was bland and limited, especially during the numerous fast days that punctuated the calendar. The main meal might consist of bread, beans, and occasionally fish, with meat reserved for rare feast days or the infirmary. During strict fasting periods, monks were allowed only one meal a day, taken in the afternoon. They ate in silence while one brother read aloud from spiritual texts, no casual conversation to make the simple food more enjoyable. Sleep offered little comfort. Monks like Matthew slept in their habits on straw mattresses, sometimes with just a thin blanket. Privacy was non-existent, with all brothers sleeping in one large dormitory. The rule of St. Benedict even specified that a candle should burn throughout the night so behaviour could be monitored. Yet within this structured world of deprivation, Matthew eventually found unexpected peace. The predictability of the hours became a comfort rather than a constraint. He discovered joy in the magnificent illuminated manuscripts he helped create in the scriptorium, adding delicate gold-leafed illustrated pages that would outlast his own short life. The very restrictions that seemed so harsh to the young novice gradually revealed themselves as a framework that freed him from worldly concerns and allowed a different kind of liberty. As you drift towards sleep, consider how the rhythms of monastic life, so foreign to our modern sensibilities, created spaces for profound contemplation and creativity that still influence our world today. The great libraries, scientific knowledge, and artistic treasures preserved by monks like Matthew form a legacy that survived despite, or perhaps because of, the stringent conditions of their creation. Let your mind wander now to a small village in southern England in the year 1348. Eleanor, a young mother of 3, has been hearing troubling rumours from travellers passing through, stories of a terrible sickness sweeping through continental Europe, claiming lives by the thousands. She tries to dismiss these tales as exaggerations, focusing instead on the daily tasks of drawing water, tending to her vegetable garden, and caring for her children. But by midsummer, the rumours become impossible to ignore. A merchant who supplies wool to Eleanor's husband falls ill after returning from London. Within days, he develops painful swellings, buboes, in his groin and armpits, followed by dark spots on his skin. The fever takes him within a week, but not before the sickness spreads to his family and neighbours. What Eleanor doesn't know, what no one in the 14th century could know, is that they're experiencing the beginning of the Black Death, the most devastating pandemic in human history. The bacteria Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas on rats, would ultimately kill somewhere between 75 and 200 million people across Europe and Asia. The medical knowledge of the time was woefully inadequate. Physicians, when they could be found, many fled the affected areas, wore bird-like masks filled with herbs that they believed would purify the bad air thought to transmit the disease. Some recommended bloodletting, or the application of herbal poultices to the buboes. Others suggested more bizarre remedies, sitting in sewers to drive away the illness with even worse smells, drinking molten gold or powdered emeralds for the very wealthy, or applying the body of a freshly killed pigeon to the swellings. For ordinary people like Eleanor, these sophisticated treatments were out of reach anyway. They relied on prayer, simple herbal remedies passed down through generations, and increasingly desperate measures as the plague took hold in their community. Some villages attempted to isolate themselves entirely, refusing entry to all outsiders. Others saw groups of flagellants pass through, people who whipped themselves publicly as religious penance, believing the plague was divine punishment for humanity's sins. Eleanor's village was devastated. By winter, she'd lost her youngest child and her husband. The parish priest, who had bravely stayed to administer last rites to the dying when many clergy fled, succumbed himself just before Christmas. There was no one left with the knowledge to perform proper burial rites, and the ground was too frozen to dig graves. Bodies accumulated, waiting for spring thaws, adding the terrible smell of death to the already overwhelming fear and grief. Yet somehow, through either natural immunity or sheer luck, Eleanor and her 2 remaining children survived. The plague eventually passed, leaving their village half empty and the survivors forever changed. Fields lay fallow without enough people to work them. Livestock wandered untended. The most basic social structures had collapsed. In the aftermath, something unexpected happened. The massive reduction in population actually improved conditions for many surviving peasants like Eleanor. With labour in short supply, she could demand better payment for her work spinning wool. Her son, who would likely have followed his father into a lifetime of servitude to the local lord, found opportunities to learn masonry instead. The rigid feudal system that had defined every aspect of Eleanor's life began to show cracks that would eventually lead to profound social changes. As you rest comfortably in your bed, think about Eleanor finding her way forward after unimaginable loss in a world transformed by invisible bacteria. The quiet darkness around you is so different from the fearful nights she must have experienced. Let the contrast ease you towards sleep, grateful for the medical knowledge, sanitation, and public health measures we often take for granted. Perhaps you've dreamed of living in a medieval castle, those impressive stone structures that seem to embody romance and nobility in our modern imagination. But for John, a serving boy in the household of an English baron in the 1300s, castle life was anything but glamorous. John slept on a thin straw pallet in the Great Hall, alongside dozens of other servants and men-at-arms. Privacy was non-existent. His day began before dawn, when he rolled up his bedding and helped prepare the hall for the day's activities. In winter, the massive stone walls that looked so impressive from the outside acted as cold sinks, drawing warmth from the body and holding the chill despite the fires kept burning day and night. Those roaring fires were necessary but created their own problems. Smoke from open hearths didn't always find its way out through the intended openings, instead lingering in the hall and chambers, causing eye irritation and respiratory problems. The constant layer of soot covered everything and everyone. John's hands were permanently darkened from cleaning ash, and his clothes always carried the smell of smoke. The sanitation situation was even less appealing. While castles did sometimes have garderobes, primitive toilets consisting of a stone seat over a chute that emptied outside the castle walls, they were few in number and primarily for the noble family's use. Servants like John more often used chamber pots that needed emptying or simply visited the castle yard or moat. The resulting smell, especially in summer, was overwhelming to modern sensibilities. Water was carried in by hand from wells or nearby sources, making it a precious commodity not to be wasted on frequent bathing. John might fully wash his body only a few times a year, instead relying on occasional wipe downs with damp cloths. The noble family he served bathed somewhat more frequently, but even they would find our modern hygiene standards excessive. Food in the castle was plentiful compared to peasant diets, but monotonous and often preserved by salting or smoking to potentially dangerous levels. Fresh vegetables were seasonal and limited in variety. Meals for servants like John consisted mainly of bread, pottage, a thick soup, and small amounts of salted fish or meat. He ate from a trencher, a piece of stale bread that served as a plate, that he could consume after it had soaked up the juices from his food. Draughts were a constant companion, whistling through arrow slits and around ill-fitting doors. In the baron's private chambers, tapestries on the walls helped insulate against the cold, but in the common areas where John spent most of his time, the chill was a fact of life. Winter evenings found servants huddled as close to the fire as their status allowed, with the most junior among them, like John, often relegated to the colder edges of the hall. Pests were an accepted part of castle life. Rats and mice scurried through the kitchens and storerooms, consuming precious food supplies and spreading disease. Fleas and lice inhabited bedding and clothing, causing constant itching and carrying illnesses of their own. The rushes strewn on floors to absorb spills and provide warmth underfoot were only changed occasionally, accumulating food scraps, animal waste from the castle dogs, and all manner of debris in the layers beneath the fresh covering. But castle life wasn't entirely miserable. For John, it offered security and regular meals, which many outside the castle walls couldn't count on. He learned to read basic messages by observing the castle steward, an opportunity that would have been unthinkable in his peasant family. And occasionally, when travelling entertainers visited or during major feast days, the entire castle community enjoyed music, performances, and more abundant food than usual. As sleep begins to overtake you, imagine John finding his spot in the great hall as night falls, stretching out on his simple pallet surrounded by the snores and murmurs of the castle's sleeping inhabitants. The massive structure that looked so romantic in storybooks was his everyday reality. Uncomfortable, smelly, and cold, yet also a world of opportunity compared to the alternatives available to him. Viking longships, not the glamorous life you'd imagine. The image of Vikings sailing fearlessly across open seas in their distinctive longships has captured our imagination for centuries. We picture these Norse warriors standing proudly at the prow, wind in their hair, heading toward adventure and conquest. But for Eric, a young man on his first raid from Denmark to the English coast around 850 CE, the reality of life aboard a Viking longship was far from romantic. Eric's journey began with the realization that the sleek vessel that looked so impressive drawn up on the beach offered almost no comfort for its crew of 35 men. The longship prioritized speed and maneuverability over any consideration of crew amenities. There were no sleeping quarters, no galley for cooking, and certainly no private space for personal needs. When Eric needed to sleep during the multi-day journey across the North Sea, he simply found a spot on the hard wooden deck, perhaps with his shield as a makeshift pillow and his cloak as a blanket. If the weather was fair, this might be merely uncomfortable. But in rain or rough seas, sleep became nearly impossible as cold water washed across the open deck, soaking everyone and everything aboard. Food was simple and uncooked. Eric's provisions consisted of dried meat, hard bread, and perhaps some cheese, all foods that could survive without preparation or refrigeration. Fresh water was carried in barrels but was strictly rationed, sometimes leading to desperate thirst if journeys took longer than expected. On longer voyages, crews might spot land just to replenish water supplies or hunt for fresh meat. Personal hygiene was virtually non-existent during voyages. With no private space and limited fresh water, Eric and his fellow crew members quickly developed a powerful collective odour. Seawater could be used for basic cleaning, but its salt left skin itchy and irritated. Vikings did value cleanliness when on land. Archaeological evidence shows they used ear cleaners, tweezers, and combs regularly. But at sea, such niceties were impossible. The physical demands of the journey were immense. When wind conditions weren't favourable, Eric and his crewmates took turns at the oars, rowing for hours until their hands blistered and their backs screamed with pain. Even in good wind, constant vigilance was required to adjust the single square sail to changing conditions and steer the ship safely through dangerous waters. Seasickness was another miserable reality that the sagas never mentioned. Many Vikings, especially those new to seafaring like Eric, suffered terribly from nausea as the longship pitched and rolled with the waves. There was no relief, no going below deck to escape the visual triggers of motion sickness, no effective remedies, and certainly no sympathy from more experienced sailors. Weather posed constant threats. The North Sea and Atlantic could turn violent with little warning. Storms that caught ships far from land led to terrifying experiences of massive waves, driving rain, and the very real possibility of capsizing. Many ships and their crews were lost to sudden weather changes, disappearing without trace. Eric witnessed one such storm on his journey, an experience that left him questioning the wisdom of the seafaring life his father had chosen before him. Navigation was surprisingly sophisticated, but still fraught with uncertainty. Vikings used the sun and stars when visible, understood prevailing winds and currents, and observed the behaviour of birds and sea life to indicate proximity to land. They even used primitive sunstones, crystals of Iceland spar, that could locate the sun's position on overcast days. Despite these techniques, getting lost was a constant risk, potentially leading to starvation or landing in hostile territory. Yet for all these hardships, the Viking longship represented one of the most remarkable technological achievements of the early medieval world. Their shallow draft allowed these vessels to navigate rivers as well as seas, making it possible for Norse explorers to travel inland throughout Europe, reaching as far as Constantinople and perhaps beyond. The design that caused Eric so much discomfort also gave him access to a world much larger than most of his contemporaries could imagine. As your consciousness drifts toward dreams, picture Eric finally sighting the English coastline after days of misery at sea. His discomfort temporarily forgotten in the excitement of arrival, he still doesn't know that the true challenges of the Viking expedition are only beginning. The sea journey that modern films depict as glorious was, in reality, just the difficult prelude to the dangers of the raid itself. The Silk Road, beautiful in stories, brutal in reality. As we continue our journey through history's less comfortable realities, let's travel along the legendary Silk Road with Mahmud, a merchant from Samarkand in the 13th century. The romantic notion of camel caravans laden with exotic goods, moving slowly across picturesque deserts, bears little resemblance to Mahmud's daily experience. Mahmud's journey begins with months of preparation, gathering not just the silks, spices, and ceramics he hopes to trade, but also the necessities for survival across some of the world's most inhospitable terrain. Each camel in his caravan can carry up to 400 pounds of goods, but a significant portion of this capacity must be dedicated to water, dried foods, and emergency supplies rather than profitable merchandise. The physical toll of the journey is immense. Mahmud spends up to 16 hours a day either walking alongside his camels or riding uncomfortably on their backs. Camels, while wonderfully adapted to desert travel, offer possibly the least comfortable ride of any domesticated animal. Their distinctive two-part gait creates a rocking motion that causes seasickness-like symptoms in many riders, especially those new to camel travel. Dust becomes Mahmud's constant companion. It infiltrates his clothing, his food, his eyes, and lungs. In the worst conditions, dust storms can reduce visibility to zero, forcing the caravan to stop and wait, often while being continuously pelted with sand and grit. After such storms, Mahmud might find drifts of sand inside his tent and coating every possession, despite his best efforts at protection. Temperature extremes create another layer of misery. The deserts and steppes of Central Asia can exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit, 49 degrees Celsius, during summer days, only to plummet below freezing at night. These daily temperature swings of 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 39 degrees Celsius or more place enormous stress on the human body. In the Taklamakan Desert, one of the most dangerous segments of the Silk Road, these conditions are compounded by almost complete absence of water or vegetation. The name Taklamakan is often said to translate as, "Once you go in, you never come out." Water sources along established routes are unreliable and often contaminated. Oases that appeared on Mahmud's map sometimes turn out to be dry when he arrives, victims of drought or changing water tables. Other water sources contain so much mineral content that drinking from them causes digestive distress. Yet there is often no alternative. Mahmud and experienced travellers like him learn to boil water when possible, and mix it with tea or alcohol to mask foul tastes and provide some protection against illness. The threat of violence is ever present. Bandits target caravans for their valuable goods, sometimes following them for days before attacking at vulnerable moments. Local warlords and minor officials demand protection payments for safe passage through their territories, effectively institutionalized robbery that Mahmud must factor into his costs. Even fellow travellers can pose dangers. Disputes over water rights at oases sometimes turn deadly. Disease spreads easily among caravan members living in close proximity under harsh conditions. A simple infected cut can become life-threatening without proper medical care. More serious illnesses like dysentery from contaminated water or pneumonia from extreme temperature changes claim many lives along the route. Perhaps most frightening is the knowledge that the same routes bringing valuable goods also facilitated the spread of bubonic plague across Asia and into Europe during various outbreaks. These psychological challenges rival the physical ones. Mahmud spends months away from his family with no means of communication. The monotony of daily travel through seemingly endless similar landscapes creates a unique form of mental fatigue. The constant vigilance required for survival leaves little energy for other thoughts or activities. Many travellers report experiences of desert mirages that distort perception and induce panic, particularly when water supplies run low. Caravanserais, the inn-like structures that appear every 20 to 30 miles along major routes, offer some respite, but these are primarily functional rather than comfortable. They provide security within their high walls and occasionally access to basic services like blacksmiths for repairs or merchants for resupply. Sleeping arrangements typically consist of platforms around a central courtyard, often crowded with dozens or hundreds of other travellers from various backgrounds speaking different languages. Yet despite these hardships, Mahmud continues to make his journeys because the potential profits justify the risks. A single successful round trip can provide enough income to support his extended family for years. Beyond financial rewards, he values the knowledge gained from exposure to diverse cultures and ideas. He collects not just goods, but stories, technological innovations and scientific concepts to bring back to Samarkand. As your mind grows heavier with approaching sleep, imagine Mahmud finally reaching the end of a difficult mountain pass to see the lights of a city in the valley below. The momentary joy of arrival will soon be replaced by the complex challenges of negotiating in an unfamiliar market. But for now, he can enjoy the simple pleasure of knowing another dangerous segment of his journey is complete. The dark reality of Renaissance Florence. The Renaissance represents one of humanity's most celebrated periods of artistic and intellectual achievement. Names like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Botticelli evoke images of extraordinary beauty and innovation. But for Lucia, a wool merchant's daughter living in 15th century Florence, daily life amid this cultural flowering was far from the refined experience we might imagine. Lucia awakens each morning to the overwhelming smells of the city. Florence, for all its architectural splendour, suffers from the same sanitation problems as other medieval and Renaissance urban centres. Human waste is commonly thrown from windows into the streets below, with the traditional warning cry of "Gardez l'eau," watch out for the water, offering only minimal protection for pedestrians. The Arno River, which bisects the city, serves as both water source and open sewer, creating a perfect environment for disease transmission. The sounds of the city assault Lucia's ears from dawn until well after dusk. Without noise regulations or sound-absorbing materials in buildings, the cacophony of craft workshops, street vendors, animals, church bells, and human voices creates a constant din that modern visitors would find intolerable. Privacy and quiet are luxuries even wealthy Florentines like Lucia's family can rarely enjoy. Violence is a regular feature of urban life. Political factions within the city frequently clash in the streets, sometimes escalating to full-scale riots. The Medici and their opponents engage in vendettas that can claim innocent lives. Public executions in the Piazza della Signoria draw large crowds, turning torture and death into community spectacles. Even walking through certain neighbourhoods after dark carries serious risk of robbery or assault. Disease remains a constant threat despite the Renaissance focus on classical learning. Medical treatment still relies heavily on the theory of 4 bodily humours that must be balanced, often through dangerous practices like bloodletting or the administration of toxic substances including mercury and arsenic. When plague periodically revisits the city, those who can afford to, like Lucia's family, flee to country estates, leaving the poor to face the epidemic with virtually no effective medical assistance. Florence's celebrated art comes with environmental and human costs largely invisible in our museum experiences today. The brilliant colours in Botticelli's paintings require pigments processed using heavy metals and other toxic substances. Apprentices in workshops developing these materials frequently suffer from poisoning that causes tremors, cognitive impairment, and premature death. Even the great artists themselves often experience health problems from chronic exposure to their materials. Lucia's personal freedom is severely constrained by social expectations. Despite Florence's relative progressiveness compared to other European cities, women of her social class are expected to marry according to family arrangements that strengthen business ties or political alliances. Her education, while better than most women would receive, focuses primarily on skills that will make her a suitable wife and household manager, rather than preparing her for independent thought or action. Religious control permeates every aspect of daily life. During the later Renaissance, Florence falls under the influence of the Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola, whose fiery sermons condemning luxury and secular art lead to the infamous Bonfire of the Vanities, where paintings, cosmetics, musical instruments, and fine clothing are burned in the public square. Even after Savonarola's execution, the Catholic Church's influence remains powerful, with behaviour controlled through the fear of both earthly punishment and eternal damnation. Class divisions are stark and visible. While wealthy merchant families like Lucia's live in stone palazzos with relatively comfortable furnishings, the majority of Florentines occupy overcrowded tenements with minimal furniture and no heating beyond a central hearth that fills their homes with smoke. Many workers in Florence's textile industry, the economic engine of the city, develop chronic lung diseases from inhaling fibres and chemicals used in wool processing and silk production. Yet amid these harsh realities, Lucia does witness the extraordinary flowering of culture that would later define the Renaissance in historical memory. On special feast days, she might see spectacular processions featuring elaborate costumes and mechanical marvels designed by the same artists who create altar paintings and sculptures. Conversations at her father's table sometimes include discussions of new ideas circulating among humanist scholars, though she's expected to listen rather than contribute. As your consciousness drifts towards sleep, imagine Lucia standing at her window overlooking the River Arno. The setting sun gilds the dome of the recently completed cathedral, creating a moment of transcendent beauty that briefly overcomes the smells, noise, and social constraints that define her daily existence. This tension between harsh reality and extraordinary human achievement is perhaps the true essence of Renaissance Florence, a complexity often lost in our romantic modern imagery. The truth about pirate life. Stories of pirates conjure images of adventure, freedom, and treasure, dashing captains with flowing coats commanding loyal crews across the sparkling Caribbean. For William, pressed into service aboard the pirate vessel Ranger in 1718, the reality proves drastically different from these romantic notions. William's introduction to pirate life comes through violence. He's a merchant sailor beaten into submission when his vessel is captured off the Carolina coast. Given the choice between joining the pirate crew or death, he chooses survival, though he quickly discovers that this decision brings its own form of suffering. The physical conditions aboard the Ranger immediately shock William, despite his years of experience on merchant vessels. Pirates, contrary to popular belief, rarely capture ships large enough for comfortable accommodations. The Ranger is overcrowded with a crew of 60 men sharing space designed for half that number. The resulting lack of personal space means William sleeps wedged between other sailors on the open deck or below in the foul-smelling hold, often in wet clothes on hard surfaces. Hygiene is virtually non-existent. Fresh water is too precious to waste on bathing, so the men quickly develop a powerful collective odour, their bodies coated with salt, sweat and tar. Lice and fleas infest the crew's hair and clothing, causing constant itching. Rats run freely throughout the vessel, consuming precious food stores and spreading disease. The combination of poor diet, contaminated water, overcrowding and filth leads to frequent outbreaks of scurvy, dysentery and other illnesses that can claim more lives than actual combat. Food aboard is monotonous and often rotten. The standard fare consists of hardtack, a rock-hard biscuit often infested with weevils, and salt beef or pork preserved in brine so strong it requires soaking before becoming barely edible. Fresh provisions are acquired when possible through raiding coastal settlements or trading, but these quickly spoil without refrigeration. Vitamin deficiencies are common, with scurvy causing particularly horrific symptoms including bleeding gums, reopening of old wounds, and eventually death. The democratic image of pirate life contains elements of truth but obscures harsh realities. While pirates did often vote on major decisions and operated under articles of agreement that specified rules and compensation, discipline remains brutal. Punishments for infractions include flogging, marooning, keel hauling, dragging a person under the ship's barnacle-encrusted hull, or execution. The captain who seems so reasonable during calm periods may become a tyrant when threatened or intoxicated. Speaking of intoxication, alcohol flows freely when available but creates its own problems. Many pirates suffer from alcoholism, with rum being the preferred spirit. While initially helping to numb the physical discomforts and psychological stresses of their existence, chronic alcohol consumption contributes to accidents, violence between crew members, and poor decision-making during critical moments. Contrary to the treasure-filled stories, most pirates live precariously. Large hauls are rare and quickly spent during riotous visits to friendly ports. The average pirate acquires valuable goods only to trade them immediately for necessities, alcohol and prostitutes. The notion of buried treasure exists primarily in fiction. Real pirates recognized that wealth not spent could be lost if they were captured or killed, which were constant possibilities. The violence of pirate life takes a psychological toll that William never anticipated. Even hardened crew members sometimes wake screaming from nightmares about battles or executions they've witnessed. The constant stress of living as outlaws, knowing that capture means almost certain hanging, creates a fatalistic outlook that encourages recklessness and further violence. Medical care aboard pirate vessels is primitive at best. The ship's surgeon, if they're fortunate enough to have captured one, typically has minimal training and few tools beyond a saw for amputations and alcohol for disinfection and anesthesia. Wounds that would be treatable today commonly become infected, leading to agonizing deaths. Even something as simple as a broken bone often results in permanent disability due to poor setting and lack of recovery time. The freedom pirates supposedly represent comes with constant danger and uncertainty. Naval patrols from multiple nations actively hunt pirate vessels, becoming increasingly coordinated and effective during the early 18th century. Merchant ships grow better armed and more prepared to resist. friendly ports become fewer as colonial governors face pressure to suppress piracy. William realizes he has traded one form of constraint, the strict hierarchy of merchant vessels, for another that offers the illusion of liberty, while actually shortening his life expectancy to a matter of months rather than years. Yet despite these harsh realities, William discovers unexpected elements of equity within pirate society. Racial divisions, while still present, are less rigid than in the colonial mainstream, with some black crew members achieving positions of authority. The Articles of Agreement ensure that injured pirates receive compensation, creating a primitive form of disability insurance unavailable to ordinary sailors, and for all its dangers, pirate life does offer moments of genuine camaraderie forged through shared hardship and mutual dependence for survival. As sleep begins to claim you, imagine William standing watch on a moonlit night, scanning the horizon for sails that might represent either prey or threat. The salt spray on his face, the gentle rocking of the ship, and the distant sound of a crewmate playing a fiddle momentarily transcend the grim realities of his chosen life. These fleeting moments of peace, not the mythical treasures or adventures, constitute the true rewards of his dangerous existence. Medieval table manners, grosser than you think. The image of medieval banquets often features lords and ladies in fine attire, dining with elaborate etiquette amid tapestries and entertainment. For Lady Margaret attending a feast at a neighbouring nobleman's castle in 14th century England, the reality contains elements of this grandeur, but with surprising crudeness that would horrify modern diners. Margaret arrives at the Great Hall to find trestle tables arranged in a U-shape, covered with white linen cloths, a sign of significant wealth. The host and most honoured guests sit at the high table on the dais, with other attendees arranged by social rank. Margaret's position halfway down one of the side tables reflects her status as a minor noblewoman, neither particularly favoured nor slighted. The first shock for modern sensibilities would be the dining arrangements. Margaret doesn't have her own plate in the modern sense. Instead, she shares a trencher, a thick slice of stale bread or a wooden plate, with the gentleman seated beside her. Personal knives are carried by guests rather than provided, and while spoons might be available for certain dishes, forks are virtually unknown in England at this time. Most food is eaten with the fingers, making the positioning of shared dishes and the cleanliness of hands matters of considerable importance. Before the meal begins, servants pass among the guests with ewers of water and towels for hand washing, a practical necessity rather than merely ceremonial, given how food will be handled. The quality of this service varies dramatically depending on the wealth of the host and the status of the guest. Margaret, in her middling position, receives adequate but not luxurious attention. The meal itself arrives in distinct courses, but unlike modern sequential courses, each medieval course consists of multiple dishes placed on the table simultaneously. Diners select what appeals to them from the options within reach, with servants bringing additional dishes to the table as previous ones are consumed. This creates a chaotic impression by modern standards, with sweet and savoury dishes appearing side by side rather than in a planned progression. Table manners, while codified, differ significantly from contemporary expectations. Margaret knows the rules: use only 3 fingers to take food, never reach across someone else, drink with a clean mouth to avoid floating food particles in shared cups. But the overall dining experience would strike us as surprisingly messy. Wealthy diners like Margaret's host might have servants carve meat at a side table, but most often, whole roasted animals arrive directly on serving platters. Guests cut what they want with their personal knives, often leading to messy carving and juices splattering nearby diners. Without individual plates, the shared trencher quickly becomes soaked with sauces and meat juices, which is partly intentional, as this flavoured bread will be eaten later or given to the poor. The absence of napkins as we know them presents another challenge. Margaret uses the tablecloth to wipe her greasy fingers, as do those around her. More refined diners might carry a personal cloth for this purpose, but many simply use their clothing or the edge of the table covering. By the end of a substantial feast, the pristine white linens have become a record of the meal's progression, stained with wine, grease and sauces. Bones and other inedible parts create another disposal challenge. The most common practice is simply dropping them on the floor, where dogs waiting under the table eagerly consume the scraps. In more refined settings, bones might be placed back on the serving dish or in a separate vessel designated for waste, but the floor remains the most convenient disposal site for most diners. Drinking arrangements similarly involve more sharing than modern diners would find comfortable. While the highest nobility might have individual cups, most guests share drinking vessels with their immediate neighbours. Margaret finds herself sharing a cup with both the gentleman beside her and the lady opposite, requiring careful timing to ensure everyone has access when thirsty. Wine and ale flow freely throughout the meal, with increasing spillage and boisterous behaviour as the evening progresses. The food itself is heavily spiced, partly for flavour, but also to mask the taste of preserved meat that may be slightly spoiled. Contrary to popular misconception, these spices aren't primarily used to hide the taste of rotten food. Medieval nobility wouldn't knowingly serve truly spoiled dishes, but the preservation techniques of salting and smoking do create strong flavours that benefit from additional seasoning. As the feast continues for hours, Margaret observes the gradual breakdown of the already limited table etiquette. Guests become increasingly intoxicated, conversations grow louder, and dining becomes messier. While outright food fights are rare and would indicate serious social transgression, the splatter from enthusiastic eating and the general disorder of the table creates an impression far removed from the idealized medieval banquet of modern imagination. By the time the final course appears, elaborate subtleties made of sugar and almond paste, shaped into fantastical creatures or scenes, many guests are too intoxicated to fully appreciate these artistic creations. The feast ends not with a gentle conclusion, but with a gradual dispersal of guests, some retiring to private chambers, others continuing to drink until they simply fall asleep at the table or on benches along the hall's walls. As your own eyelids grow heavy, imagine Margaret making her way to her assigned sleeping chamber, likely shared with several other female guests. Despite the discomforts of the meal by modern standards, she considers the evening a success. She has maintained her social connections, demonstrated proper etiquette, and experienced hospitality that, while messy to our eyes, represents the height of 14th century refinement. The uncomfortable truth about traditional childbirth. As your mind continues to drift towards sleep, let's explore another aspect of historical life that has been dramatically transformed by modern advances. For Agnes, a young woman giving birth to her first child in a small English village in 1520, the experience of childbirth bears almost no resemblance to contemporary medical practices. Agnes's labour begins in the early morning hours. Following tradition, the men of the household, including her husband, are immediately excluded from the birthing room. Childbirth is considered exclusively women's domain, with knowledge passed through generations of midwives and female relatives rather than formal medical training. The birthing room is prepared according to established customs, some practical and others based on superstition. Windows are covered to create a warm, dark environment thought to ease the birth process. A fire burns despite the summer heat, as cold air is believed dangerous to both mother and newborn. Religious items such as blessed candles or small relics might be placed around the room for spiritual protection during this dangerous transition. Unlike modern births that typically take place lying flat on a bed, Agnes labours in positions that use gravity to advantage, kneeling, squatting, or sitting on a birthing stool with a horseshoe-shaped seat that allows the midwife access to catch the baby. These positions, while more physically effective for delivery, require tremendous strength from Agnes as her labour progresses through hours and potentially days. Pain management consists primarily of herbal remedies with limited effectiveness. The midwife might offer Agnes preparations of herbs like chamomile for calming, raspberry leaf to strengthen contractions, or ergot to speed difficult labour, though this last carries significant dangers of its own. For most women like Agnes, however, the pain of childbirth must simply be endured as Eve's biblical punishment, with physical comfort coming only through the support of the women attending her. The dangers Agnes faces are substantial. Without understanding of germ theory, hygiene practices are based on traditional cleanliness rather than sterilisation. The midwife washes her hands but has no concept of bacteria that might cause childbed fever, one of the leading killers of new mothers. Agnes herself has been advised not to bathe for the final weeks of pregnancy, meaning she enters labour in a state modern medicine would consider unnecessarily risky. If complications develop, medical interventions are primitive and often fatal. There are no fetal heart monitors to detect distress, no ultrasounds to identify problematic positioning, and certainly no option for caesarean delivery except as a desperate measure to save the baby after the mother's death. In cases of obstructed labour, both Agnes and her child face likely death after days of agony. Even in less dramatic complications such as postpartum hemorrhage, effective treatments are limited to herbal remedies of questionable efficacy and primitive physical interventions. Yet for all these dangers, traditional midwifery did develop considerable practical knowledge. Experienced midwives became skilled at determining fetal position through external palpation, recognizing the progression of normal labour, and even performing version, manually turning a baby in the womb, to improve delivery prospects. The communal nature of traditional birth also provided significant emotional support, with women who had themselves experienced childbirth surrounding Agnes with encouragement and practical assistance. The immediate postpartum period differs dramatically from modern practice as well. After delivery, Agnes is considered in a dangerous transitional state, vulnerable to both physical and supernatural threats. She and her newborn enter a period of confinement lasting typically 40 days, during which she gradually returns to normal activities while following specific dietary and behavioural restrictions. The community recognises this recovery period as necessary, providing food and assistance to the new mother in a way modern women often find lacking in postpartum support. The statistics of childbirth in Agnes's time tell a sobering story. Approximately 1 in 3 women died from pregnancy-related causes during their reproductive years, with first births like Agnes's carrying particularly high risks. Infant mortality claimed as many as 1 in 5 babies before their first birthday. These numbers reflect not just the dangers of childbirth itself, but the overall context of life without antibiotics, blood transfusions, or nutritional understanding. As you sink deeper towards sleep, imagine Agnes finally hearing her baby's first cry after hours of labour. The exhaustion, pain, and fear give way momentarily to profound relief and joy, emotions that transcend historical periods and medical advances. Despite the dangers and discomforts of traditional childbirth, Agnes has accomplished what many women before and after her would recognise as one of life's most transformative experiences, though modern mothers might be particularly grateful for the medical advances that would eventually make this journey substantially safer. The reality of ancient Roman bathhouses. Let's continue our historical journey with Marcus, a middle-class merchant visiting a public bathhouse in Rome around 120 CE. The Roman baths hold an iconic place in our historical imagination as centres of cleanliness, leisure, and sophisticated social interaction. While these impressions contain elements of truth, the actual experience would surprise and potentially disturb modern sensibilities. Marcus begins his bath visit in the mid-afternoon, a common time for Romans to conduct this daily ritual. He pays a modest fee at the entrance, just a quadrans, the smallest Roman coin, as public baths are subsidised to ensure accessibility across social classes. Women either use the facilities during designated morning hours or, in larger establishments, have separate sections, though mixed bathing does occur during certain periods despite periodic legal prohibitions. The first surprise for modern visitors would be the lack of privacy. Changing rooms, apoditeria, offer no individual stalls or curtains. Marcus simply removes his toga and places it in a niche along the wall, potentially guarded by a slave if he's brought one, or by an attendant for an additional fee. Theft is common enough that wealthier patrons bring slaves specifically to watch their belongings. The casual Roman attitude toward nudity means Marcus thinks nothing of disrobing completely in this public space, a cultural norm that would shock many contemporary visitors. Moving into the bathing sequence proper, Marcus first enters the tepidarium, a warm room that prepares the body for the more extreme temperatures to follow. The heating system, the famous Roman hypercaust with its hollow floors and walls, circulating hot air from furnaces, represents impressive engineering but creates an environment modern visitors might find uncomfortably stuffy and smoky. Carbon monoxide poisoning was an occupational hazard for bath attendants who spent too much time near the heating systems. The next space, the caldarium or hot room, presents an even more intense experience. Temperatures here might reach 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, or higher, with humidity added by water sprinkled onto the hot floors. Marcus, like other bathers, sits or reclines on hot marble benches that would burn unprotected skin, necessitating the wooden sandals many Romans wear in this room. The heat opens pores and induces heavy sweating, considered essential for good health under the medical theories of the time. Rather than using soap, which exists but remains expensive and uncommon, Marcus applies olive oil to his skin. An attendant or slave then scrapes this oil away using a curved metal tool called a strigil, removing dirt, dead skin, and sweat in the process. The scraping can be uncomfortably vigorous, sometimes drawing blood from those with sensitive skin. The used oil, mixed with bodily debris, falls to the floor, contributing to the slipperiness that makes bath accidents relatively common. The final thermal stage involves a plunge into the frigidarium, a cold pool that closes pores opened by heat and provides an invigorating shock to the system. This extreme temperature transition, going from intensely hot rooms to cold water immersion, stresses the cardiovascular system in ways modern health practitioners might question, particularly for older individuals. Water quality would alarm contemporary bathers. While the Romans built magnificent aqueducts to bring fresh water into their cities, the concept of changing or filtering the water in public bath pools was limited. In busier establishments, hundreds of bathers might use the same water throughout the day. Without effective disinfection methods, skin infections, fungal conditions, and parasites spread easily in this environment. The water in some pools might be changed only every few days, with visible debris simply skimmed from the surface. The toilet facilities attached to many bathhouses compound these hygiene issues. Roman public latrines typically feature long marble benches with keyhole-shaped openings positioned over flowing water channels. While impressively engineered, these facilities lack privacy dividers and toilet paper. Instead, users share communal sponges on sticks, rinsed in channels of running water between uses, a practice that efficiently transmits intestinal parasites and diseases among the population. Yet for all these aspects that might disturb modern visitors, Roman baths offer genuine pleasures and important social functions. After completing the bathing sequence, Marcus moves to additional facilities that many larger thermae bath complexes provide: exercise areas, palaestrae, libraries, snack bars, and conversation spaces. Here the bathhouse reveals its true character as community centre, rather than merely hygienic facility. For Romans like Marcus, the baths serve as essential networking spaces where business contacts are made, political alliances formed, and social bonds strengthened. The nudity that might embarrass modern visitors actually functions as a social equalizer. Without the visible markers of status that clothing provides, conversation flows more freely across class boundaries, though slaves and the poorest citizens still use separate facilities or different hours. The bathhouse experience includes sensory pleasures beyond cleanliness. The impressive architecture with its high vaulted ceilings, coloured marble surfaces and decorative mosaics creates an environment of beauty and relaxation. Vendors sell food and drinks to enjoy after bathing. Some facilities offer massage, depilation, and other personal services. Musical performances or poetry readings might entertain visitors in the larger imperial thermae. As drowsiness overtakes you, imagine Marcus concluding his bath visit with a light massage using scented oils, followed by conversation with friends in a sunny courtyard. Despite hygiene practices that would concern modern public health officials, he leaves feeling genuinely refreshed, socially connected, and having participated in a quintessentially Roman experience that served practical, social, and even spiritual functions in ancient urban life. The harsh reality of ancient Egyptian construction. The magnificent pyramids, temples, and monuments of ancient Egypt stand as testaments to extraordinary architectural achievement. For Necht, a farmer conscripted into labour service during the annual Nile flood, around 2500 BCE, the construction of these eternal structures reveals a physical and social reality far removed from the mysterious, magical process often portrayed in popular imagination. Necht's labour service begins with a journey away from his small farming village to the construction site of a new temple complex. This conscription isn't technically slavery. He remains a free man and will return to his fields when the Nile recedes, but refusal isn't an option. The corvée labour system requires all able-bodied men to serve the pharaoh for a designated period each year, conveniently scheduled during the inundation when agricultural work becomes impossible, as fields disappear under floodwaters. Upon arrival at the construction site, Necht joins a crew under the supervision of a professional builder, who serves year-round in the pharaoh's service. The organisation of a labour is surprisingly sophisticated, with specialised teams responsible for different aspects of the massive project. Some quarry stone, others transport blocks, and still others handle the precise placement and finishing of materials. Nacht's farming background assigns him to one of the less skilled but physically demanding transport teams. The working conditions immediately prove brutal. Summer in Egypt brings temperatures regularly exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, with minimal shade available at the open construction site. Nacht works from first light until dusk, moving massive limestone blocks using simple but effective technologies, wooden sledges, rollers, and immense amounts of human power. The standard work team for moving larger blocks might include 20 men or more, each straining against the crushing weight of stone. Injuries are commonplace and often serious. Crushed limbs, broken bones, and back injuries claim numerous victims as blocks shift unexpectedly, or men lose footing on the dusty, irregular surfaces. Medical treatment consists primarily of splinting broken bones, applying herbal poultices to wounds, and simple pain management through beer and opium-based preparations. Fatal accidents receive brief acknowledgement, the body removed and replaced by another labourer with minimal disruption to the workflow. The physical toll extends beyond accidents. Within days, Nacht's hands develop painful blisters that break and become infected in the dusty conditions. His back and shoulders ache constantly from the unaccustomed strain. Dehydration presents a constant threat despite water carriers circulating among the workers with clay pots. Many labourers develop respiratory problems from the omnipresent stone dust that coats their skin and fills their lungs. Living conditions for temporary labourers like Nacht provide minimal comfort. He sleeps in a crowded camp of simple reed shelters that offer little protection from the elements or desert predators like scorpions and snakes. Food, while sufficient in quantity, consists mainly of bread, onions and beer, the standard diet for working-class Egyptians, but lacking the occasional fish or fowl he might enjoy in his village. Sanitation facilities are primitive at best, creating conditions ripe for the spread of dysentery and other diseases that claim almost as many lives as construction accidents. Yet amid these harsh conditions, Nacht observes elements of care and sophistication that complicate the popular image of Egyptian monuments built through sheer human suffering. The rations, while simple, are regular and adequate. The pharaonic authorities understand that undernourished workers cannot perform effectively. Basic medical care is available through the temple physicians. The engineering techniques he witnesses reveal extraordinary precision and planning, rather than simply overwhelming force. The social organisation also demonstrates complexity beyond simple oppression. Professional builders who supervise teams like Nacht's have developed effective techniques for moving and placing enormous stones using ramps, levers and counterweights that minimise, though certainly don't eliminate, the physical burden. These skilled workers form a middle class of sorts, with technical knowledge passed through generations and recorded in papyri that serve as instructional manuals. Religious significance permeates the construction process, providing meaning beyond mere forced labour. The temple Nacht helps build isn't simply a monument to pharaonic ego, but a cosmic structure designed to maintain Mat, the fundamental order of the universe. Morning rituals before work begins remind participants of their role in this sacred enterprise. Even the humblest labourer understands his contribution maintains divine harmony and ensures the continued fertility of the land upon which his livelihood depends. Evidence of worker communities excavated near major construction sites reveals further nuance. While temporary labourers like Nacht endure basic conditions, the professional builders and craftsmen who work year-round often live with their families in planned communities, with relatively comfortable housing, specialised craft shops, and communal storage facilities. Graffiti from these sites includes not just names, but occasional complaints, jokes, and records of competition between work teams, humanising touches from people who clearly possessed agency within their social context. As sleep beckons more insistently, imagine Nacht at the end of his 3-month service period, preparing to return to his village as the floodwaters begin to recede. His body bears new scars and calluses, but he also carries pride in his participation in a project designed for eternity. The temple walls he helped raise will stand for thousands of years, though history will remember the pharaoh who commissioned them rather than the countless hands that built them stone by stone. The uncomfortable truth about medieval armour. Knights in shining armour galloping gracefully across battlefields represent one of the most enduring images from medieval history. For Sir Robert, a 15th century English knight preparing for battle during the Wars of the Roses, the reality of wearing armour reveals challenges and discomforts that romantic depictions typically overlook. Robert's day begins hours before combat with the complex process of armouring. Unlike the popular misconception that knights needed cranes to mount their horses, properly made plate armour allows remarkable mobility, but only when fitted correctly by experienced hands. Robert's squire assists him in a methodical layering process that starts with padded undergarments, crucial for preventing the metal plates from chafing against skin. The arming doublet comes first, a quilted garment with points, ties, attached at strategic locations for securing various armour components. Next come the legwear, sabatons for the feet, greaves for the lower legs, cuisses for the thighs, and a combination of mail and plate protecting the vulnerable areas behind the knees. The lower body armour alone might weigh 25 pounds, 11 kilograms, already creating unusual sensations of weight distribution that require adjusted movement patterns. The upper body receives similar layered protection, a breastplate and backplate connected at the shoulders and sides, pauldrons protecting the shoulder joints, vambraces for the forearms, and gauntlets covering hands and wrists. Each piece must connect securely without restricting movement needed for combat. The entire process takes nearly an hour with experienced help, longer if adjustments are needed for comfort or function. The first major discomfort Robert notices is heat. The combination of quilted undergarments and metal exterior creates an environment similar to wearing a winter coat in summer. Within minutes of completing the armouring process, he begins sweating profusely. During battle or tournament, dehydration becomes a serious concern, with knights sometimes losing several pounds of water weight through perspiration alone. Tales of knights dying from heat exhaustion inside their armour during summer campaigns contain unfortunate truth. Weight presents the next challenge. A complete harness of plate armour typically weighs between 45 to 55 pounds, 20 to 25 kilograms, comparable to the equipment load of a modern soldier. While this weight is distributed across the body more effectively than commonly believed, it still requires significant strength and endurance. Robert has trained since childhood to move effectively while armoured, but the fatigue factor remains substantial, particularly during extended combat. Visibility and hearing become significantly compromised once Robert dons his helmet. The visor provides crucial face protection, but restricts his field of vision to narrow slits. Peripheral awareness, crucial in combat, diminishes dramatically. With his helmet closed, Robert's hearing becomes muffled, making battlefield communication challenging. Many knights left their visors open until the last possible moment despite the increased danger, simply to maintain better situational awareness. Breathing inside a closed helmet quickly becomes laboured as exhaled carbon dioxide builds up in the confined space. The resulting feeling of suffocation adds psychological stress to the already intense experience of combat. Some helmets incorporated ventilation holes to mitigate this problem, but these necessarily created vulnerable points in the protective shell. The sensory deprivation extends to touch as well. With hands encased in gauntlets, Robert loses fine motor control and tactile sensation. Simply grasping his sword requires different technique than when barehanded. More mundane activities like adjusting equipment, opening a water flask, or mounting a horse demand practice and adaptation. Knights often remove their gauntlets whenever possible between combat engagements, immediately improving comfort and capability. Bathroom functions create particularly undignified challenges. Once fully armoured, answering nature's call becomes nearly impossible without assistance. Before major battles, experienced knights typically avoided food and limited water intake, a practice that reduced the likelihood of needing to relieve themselves, but increased risks of weakness and dehydration during combat. For extended campaigns, components of leg armour included design elements allowing minimal opening for necessary functions, though using these effectively required both practice and lack of privacy. Joint articulation, while more sophisticated than commonly portrayed, still restricts natural movement. Robert cannot easily bend, pick up dropped objects, scratch an itch on his back, or turn his head to check his blind spots. The articulated plates allow him to mount his horse unassisted and swing his weapons effectively, but with noticeably less range of motion than when unarmoured. Modern reconstructions suggest fully armoured knights could run, mount horses unaided, and even perform somersaults if sufficiently trained, but these actions required significantly more energy and specific techniques different from unarmoured movement. Despite these considerable discomforts, armour provided remarkable protection. Robert has survived previous battles thanks to his harness turning aside sword blows that would have been fatal otherwise. Well-made plate armour could resist slashing weapons almost completely, and significantly reduce impact damage from crushing weapons. Against the era's ranged weapons, armour provided variable protection. Effective against most bows at distance, but vulnerable to crossbows and the increasingly common early firearms at closer range. The psychological impact of wearing armour creates complex effects. On one hand, Robert feels nearly invulnerable to certain attacks, creating confidence that bolsters his fighting spirit. Simultaneously, the sensory deprivation, breathing difficulties, and awareness of limited mobility in case of retreat generate anxiety that compounds the natural fear of combat. Unlike modern body armour designed to be psychologically unobtrusive, medieval armour's presence remained constantly felt for better and worse. As your consciousness drifts ever closer to sleep, imagine Robert after the battle, assuming he survives. The removal of armour brings immediate relief but reveals new discomforts. Skin raw from chafing despite the padded undergarments, bruises forming where blunt impacts transferred force through the plate, and extreme muscle fatigue from carrying the additional weight throughout combat. The romantic image of the knight seldom includes these aftermath realities, the unglamorous pain and recovery that followed the glory of battle. Why ancient Olympic athletes would shock modern fans. As modern minds drift towards sleep, let's visit the ancient Olympic Games through the eyes of Theon, a young wrestler from Athens competing in the 188th Olympiad, 28 CE. While we celebrate the historical Olympic tradition as the predecessor to our modern games, the actual practices and conditions would profoundly shock contemporary sports fans. Theon's Olympic journey begins with a fundamental difference from modern competition: complete nudity. The word gymnasium derives from the Greek gymnos, meaning naked, and ancient Greek athletes competed without any clothing at all. This practice, shocking to most modern sensibilities, seemed entirely natural in a culture that celebrated the athletic male form as an aesthetic and spiritual ideal. For Theon, competing nude represents not embarrassment but pride in displaying his physically prepared body. The religious context of the ancient games would surprise modern viewers expecting a secular sporting event. Before competition begins, Theon and his fellow athletes sacrifice a pig at the altar of Zeus, swearing solemn oaths to compete fairly. The games themselves are fundamentally a religious festival honouring Zeus, with athletic competition serving as devotional offering rather than entertainment for its own sake. Priests maintain constant fires at altars throughout the sacred precinct, with the smoke and smell of burning offerings permeating the entire venue. Violence in ancient Olympic combat sports far exceeds anything permitted in modern competition. Theon's wrestling match allows techniques that would immediately disqualify modern wrestlers: breaking fingers, bending limbs against joints, and choking. The pancration, combined wrestling and boxing, proves even more brutal, prohibiting only eye gouging and biting, though even these rules see frequent violation in the heat of competition. Deaths during combat sports, while not common, occur often enough that they receive matter-of-fact mention in historical records, rather than the scandal such an outcome would generate today. The competitive environment lacks many comforts modern athletes take for granted. Theon competes in midsummer heat, approaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, without benefit of shade, organised hydration, or modern sports medicine. The sprawling Olympic complex does include running water and basic bathing facilities, but these primitively chlorinated pools serve thousands of visitors, creating hygiene conditions that would alarm contemporary public health officials. Accommodation for athletes resembles military encampment, rather than the carefully designed Olympic villages of the modern era. Theon sleeps in a simple tent within the Altis, sacred precinct, or in basic barracks with dozens of other competitors. Privacy is non-existent, sanitation primitive, and comfort minimal. The focus remains entirely on competition rather than athlete experience, a prioritization most modern Olympians would find shocking. The concept of amateur competition, so important in early modern Olympic revival, would have bewildered Theon. Ancient Olympic victors received substantial material rewards, including lifetime pensions, tax exemptions, and celebrity status, that translated into significant wealth through appearances and endorsements. Cities often paid handsome bonuses to victorious athletes representing them, creating an effectively professional class of competitors despite the absence of formal leagues or contracts. The prejudices embedded in ancient Olympics would disturb contemporary viewers. Women are barred not just from competing, but even from watching most events, under penalty of death. The sole exception is the priestess of Demeter, whose sacred status grants her unique permission to attend. Separate women's games dedicated to Hera, Zeus's wife, do exist but receive far less prestige or attention. The exclusivity extends to participation as well. Only free Greek men can compete, explicitly excluding slaves and non-Greeks from official recognition regardless of athletic ability. Corruption and political interference, while condemned in principle, feature regularly in Olympic competitions. Judges may show hometown bias in subjective scoring decisions. Wealthy competitors sometimes attempt to bribe opponents to throw matches. City-states occasionally threaten or pressure judges when politically important victories are at stake. These practices generate criticism from contemporary writers like Theon's time, yet persist throughout the ancient game's thousand-year history. Training methods would alarm modern sports medicine professionals. Theon's preparation includes practices based on humoral theory rather than scientific understanding of physiology. Deliberate dehydration to harden the body, dietary restrictions founded on supernatural beliefs rather than nutrition science, and training volumes that modern coaches would consider dangerous overtraining. Recovery practices similarly reflect pre-scientific understanding, sometimes exacerbating injuries that modern treatment could easily remedy. Yet for all these differences, Theon experiences many emotions familiar to modern Olympians. The pride of representing his city-state, the nervous anticipation before competition, the camaraderie with fellow athletes who understand the sacrifices required to reach this level. These transcend the considerable historical and cultural differences. His ultimate goal of achieving arete, excellence, through athletic perfection, would resonate with many contemporary competitors, even if his specific understanding of that concept differs from modern athletic values. As sleep finally begins to claim your consciousness, imagine Theon in his moment of victory, arm raised by the judge, olive wreath placed upon his head. The crowd's roar, the sense of achievement, the knowledge that his name will join the list of Olympic victors recorded for posterity. These moments of triumph connect ancient and modern athletic experiences across the centuries, even as the profound differences in context remind us how dramatically human cultural practices can evolve, while core aspirations remain recognizable. Conclusion: finding rest in historical perspective. As your mind now hovers at the edge of sleep, consider how these glimpses into history's uncomfortable realities might actually help you rest more peacefully. The medieval jester performing through pain, the monk shivering through pre-dawn prayers, the plague survivor rebuilding her world. Their stories remind us that human resilience has persisted through conditions far more challenging than most of us will ever experience. The distance between their worlds and our comfortable beds creates a peculiar kind of gratitude. The medical advances that make childbirth safer, the sanitation systems that prevent plague, the social protections that prohibit forced labor, these represent genuine progress worth appreciating as consciousness fades toward dreams. Perhaps there's something soothing about placing our own troubles in this longer historical context. The anxieties that keep us awake at night would likely seem trivial to Thomas the Jester, whose very survival depended on making a temperamental king laugh. The minor discomforts of modern life pale alongside Eleanor's experience of the Black Death, claiming half her village. Yet these historical figures were not merely sufferers, they were complete humans who experienced joy, connection, and meaning despite their challenging circumstances. Their resilience reminds us of our own capacity to navigate difficulty. Their distance from us in time offers perspective on our temporary troubles. As you finally drift into sleep, let these historical lives provide an unusual form of comfort. Whatever challenges tomorrow brings, you'll face them without the need to scrape your skin clean with a strigil, wear armor into conflict, or worry that a poorly timed joke might cost you your head. In this comparative perspective, perhaps you'll find both gratitude for our present moment and confidence in humanity's enduring ability to adapt and find meaning, even in the most difficult circumstances. Sleep well, knowing that history's discomforts have given way to the relative peace of our present moment, and that human resilience has remained a constant companion throughout the journey.